Hi, my name is Solomon, and today I will walk you through how to build your LoCoBot computer and get it installed with Ubuntu Linux 2004. This tutorial is only meant for people who are curious about how the installation procedure works, because by default, when you get the LoCoBot, all of this is already done for you. The hardware you will need is a Intel NUC computer like this one. This is a NUC 8i3BEH. So it has a it has an i3 processor, but of course, if you wanted to use an i5 or an i7 or anything else that's above that, you could use that as well. You will also need a hard drive that is at least 64 gigabytes in storage. I'm using a 240 gigabyte hard drive, SSD actually, like this one. It's a 2.5-inch SSD. It fits into the Intel NUC computer. You will also need at least 8 gigabytes of RAM, like this one. This is a DDR4 2400 RAM card. And of course, a power supply. The NUC takes 19 volts, so this provides 19 volts and enough current to power the NUC. Besides for the computer, you will also need a empty USB stick, or if it has anything on it, make sure that you don't care about losing it. This USB stick will hold the actual Linux image that you will then put into the LoCoBot computer and install Linux on it. So it has to be at least 4 gigabytes because the Linux image itself is quite big. It's about 3 gigabytes. Besides for that, you will need your personal computer to actually flash Ubuntu 2004 to the flash drive. Now, what operating system your personal computer is running doesn't make any difference. It could be Windows, it could be Linux, it could be Mac. As long as you can get the image onto your flash drive, that's all that matters. All right, so to do that, first you'll need to get the image. So you want to go to releases.ubuntu.com/2004. In this case, the most recent release is 2004.2, but in a few weeks or so, or a few months, it could be 2004.3, 2004.4. So whichever one is the latest, that's the one you want to choose. And you want to click the 64-bit PC AMD 64 desktop image. And that should start downloading. I'd recommend to do this on while your computer is plugged into an Ethernet cable, because over Wi-Fi, it could take a long time. I've already downloaded it, so I'm going to cancel the download here and show you where it is in my downloads folder. It is right here. So once we have this image, we have to take our USB stick and put it into our computer. All right, and here's the 4 gigabyte USB stick. It's empty. Okay. So now that we have the image, we still have to get a tool that will allow us to flash the image to the USB stick. So to do that, I would recommend using Balena Etcher. You just go to balena.io/etcher. This is a cross-platform flashing tool for operating systems, for images. That's why I like it so much. You can use it on Windows, Mac, Linux, just the same. So what you're going to do is press the button. Of course, make sure that you're downloading it for the right system, and it should start downloading. I've already done this as well, so I'm going to cancel this and show you where it is in my computer over here. And then what you're going to do is right-click it, open with Archive Manager if you're on Linux, and then you want to extract it to your desktop. All right, extraction was good. Great. So, oh, there we go. Here is the shortcut. You want to double click that, and it should bring up this GUI. Then click Flash from File. go to your downloads, go to the image and double click that. You can see here is 2.9 gigabytes. We have that done. It already found the 4 gigabyte USB stick, so that's great to go. And all you got to do is hit the flash button. You want to put in your password too if it asks for that. Okay, and that should take a good 10 minutes or so. So let's fast forward. I've already done this, so we're going to go on to the next step, which is taking the USB stick out of the computer and putting it into your Intel NUC. Before sticking our USB stick with Ubuntu Linux into the computer, we first have to build the computer. To do that, take a Phillips head screwdriver bit and stick it into a drill, or just use a Phillips head screwdriver and unscrew the bottom of the Intel NUC. Okay, now that we have unscrewed the bottom, we're going to insert the RAM like this. Then insert the SSD drive like this. Screw the bottom panel of the computer back into place. Keep in mind the front label. This should be pointing to the front of the computer. And then screw it back in place. All right, now we're ready to move on to the next step of flashing Ubuntu 20 from the USB stick into the computer. Now that we have the Intel NUC computer assembled and Ubuntu Linux 2004 flashed to the USB stick, let's install Linux onto the Intel NUC. First, plug in a keyboard, mouse, and monitor into your Intel NUC and also a power supply. Next, plug in the USB stick with Ubuntu Linux flashed on it into an available port on the computer. Finally, press the power button. After pressing the power button, press the F2 key a few times on your keyboard to bring up the visual BIOS. The reason we are bringing up the visual BIOS is because on our specific computer, there is a feature called Secure Boot, which is enabled by default. However, in order for Linux to install proprietary drivers to the NUC's hardware, we're going to need to disable this. So in Visual BIOS, go to Advanced, go to Boot, then go to Secure Boot, uncheck Secure Boot, and then press F10 to save the changes. After pressing F10, the computer will restart itself and it should go directly into the Ubuntu installer. In the Ubuntu installer, we're going to want to just click Ubuntu, the default option. After Ubuntu finishes the checks before starting the computer, you will see this welcome message asking if you want to try Ubuntu or install Ubuntu. Try Ubuntu is simply a way to try Ubuntu 2004 on the USB stick. It won't affect anything on your hard drive. But if you want to install Ubuntu, that will install Linux from the USB stick into the SSD on the Intel NUC. So in our case, we want to install Ubuntu, so click that button. We're in America, so we're going to use English for our keyboard and layout. Let us connect to a network so we can install updates. Our network is TRNet, but of course your network will be different. Then press continue. So you'll get a window that says updates and other software. We're going to do a normal installation, and we're going to check the download updates while installing Ubuntu option, and check the install third-party software for graphics and Wi-Fi hardware and additional media formats. You will know if secure boot is available on your computer and is currently enabled by if you have some text below asking to create a password to bypass secure boot. However, the best way to go about doing that is just to disable it in the beginning using the Visual BIOS like we did, and then you won't have to deal with this with creating a password. After checking this, we're going to press continue. We do not have any operating system, so we're just going to erase the disk and install Ubuntu. As far as advanced features go, we're just going to leave that at none and click install now. There's going to be 2 partitions. Just go with the defaults and press continue. We are in Chicago, so we're going to continue with Chicago. We're going to name this computer LoCoBot. And in this case, we're going to have both the username and the computer name be LoCoBot. Our password is going to be LoCoBot. And just confirm your password is also going to be LoCoBot. You should leave the require my password to log in and then press continue. Now Ubuntu Linux 2004 will be flashed to the SSD. This should take about 3.5 to 5 minutes. All right, once this message appears, you should click the Restart Now button. Once you see the message of removing the installation medium, just unplug the USB stick from the Intel NUC. Then press Enter on your keyboard. If you see this splash screen appear, then you know that Linux has been installed successfully on your computer. Let's go into it by pressing Enter on the LoCoBot. Password is LoCoBot. You'll see a welcome screen saying about connecting online accounts. You can do whatever you want, but for this tutorial, we're just going to skip this. We're going to skip live patch 2. If you want, you can send system info to Canonical. By default, we have this checked to no. And then for privacy, this is also just leave it at its default. Press next, and then press done. And that's how you get Ubuntu 2004 installed on an Intel NUC. Now, at the time of this writing, or at the time of that this video was made, RealSense does not yet support kernel 5.8. So if you open up a terminal by pressing Ctrl-Alt-T and then typing uname-r, you'll see it says 5.8.0-48-generic. Yours might say something a little bit different because as updates occur, this number will get a little bit higher, but it'll probably be still 5.8 if you're watching this video. The unfortunate thing is that RealSense, for their cameras, only works, the kernel version that is compatible with their cameras is only 5.4. They do plan support for 5.8, so it's very possible that, a couple months from the date this video was created, they'll have support, and if that's the case, you can skip the rest of this video. But if they still don't have compatibility with kernel 5.8, then you should continue on watching this video. You can tell whether or not they have support by clicking, going here and on your internet browser. And then we're going to go to type RealSense ROS in the search bar. Go here. And then you're going to click RealSense 2 camera release notes, and then click the libRealSense version 2. Whatever the latest version is. You'll see whether or not kernel 5.8 is supported by, there'll be a comma here on a 5.8. As I said, right now only 5.4 is supported, so we still have to do the next step in this video. Okay. Let's just update the computer, do a sudo apt update, type in LoCoBot for the password. And then sudo apt upgrade to install the software, the updates. Okay, now that we have updated the system, we can move on to rolling back the kernel. Like I showed before, if you type uname-r in the terminal, you get 5.8. So we want to be able to boot to 5.4. So to get kernel 5.4, we're going to type sudo apt install Linux generic, then press enter, and you can see that this will install the latest kernel for 5.4. So type Y, then press enter. All right, now that we have kernel 5.4 installed, we have to switch kernels. If you actually type uname-r again, you'll see that we're still on kernel 5.8. So normally the way you would do this is you would reboot the computer, and then you would enter the grub menu. The grub menu is kind of like a way to choose which kernel you want Linux to load on top of. The problem is that in order to get the grub menu to show up at boot, you have to press the escape key a few times. But if you press it too few times, you're not going to get it. It's not going to load up. But if you press it too many times, you're going to go right past it, and that doesn't work either. So in order to make this a little bit easier, we're going to configure that the grub menu should show up by default for 5 seconds whenever the computer is booted. So in order to do that, type sudo nano /etc/default/grub. Okay. So what we're going to do is head over to the grub timeout style, which is by default hidden. Like I said, whenever you're whenever the NUC is rebooted, the grub menu doesn't show up. So we're going to change this so that it says menu. And then we're going to change grub timeout to be 5 seconds, like that. Then we're going to save those settings. So press Ctrl-O on your keyboard. It'll say file name to write on the bottom. Press enter. It'll say wrote 33 lines in this case. Then press Ctrl-X on your keyboard, and that should exit. After exiting the grub file, you want to update the grub feature. So you're going to type sudo update-grub and press enter. Then you want to reboot the computer by typing sudo reboot. Okay, this should load up. You want to do advanced options for Ubuntu. Make sure to change the arrow key within 5 seconds. Otherwise, you'll just go back into Ubuntu. All right, now we have a few options here. Like our default kernel was 5.8. But we want to go into 5.4.0 - in our case it's 70 - generic. Essentially, you just want to click the one that says 5.4 that does not say recovery mode. Then you press enter. All right, now that should boot into kernel 5.4. Type your password again, LoCoBot. Okay, open up a terminal by pressing Ctrl-Alt-T. And now if you type uname-r, we should see 5.4.0-70-generic, which is great. But here's the problem. If you want to boot into kernel 5.4, you will have to go into advanced options every time in the grub menu to change the kernel. Because by default, Linux will just boot to the latest kernel. So we don't want that to happen. We want it to boot to 5.4 every time. So one way of doing this is to get rid of kernel 5.8. So let me just show you that if you, the fact that kernel 5.8 is installed. So if you try to do sudo apt purge, then you type Linux dash, and then you press the tab key a few times, you can see that there's headers for 5.8, there's HWE 5.8, and Linux image 5.8, Linux modules 5.8, extra 5.8. So all of these, anything that essentially says 5.8 or has HWE in its name, like Linux generic HWE 2004. So we want to get rid of that. So one way of doing that is, of course, going one by one. But I found that if you type sudo these three commands, it usually works. So type sudo apt purge Linux modules -5.8, and then the asterisk, which is kind of like a wildcard. Press enter. Type your password, LoCoBot. Okay. Then it'll just tell you like, oh, we're going to uninstall these packages, and you should see that all of them essentially say 5.8 or have HWE in the name. Press Y and then type enter. Okay, so let's see how many are left. We still have a few that are 5.8. So the next command you want to run is to purge the Linux headers. -5.8 wildcard. Then you press Y and then enter. And now if I do sudo apt purge Linux -tab a few times, you can still see there are a couple that say 5.8, but by typing sudo apt auto remove, that should remove any packages that aren't necessary, including those 5.8 headers like we see over here. Press Y, then type enter. All right, so now if we do sudo apt purge Linux -tab a few times, we should no longer see anything that says 5.8 or HWE, and looks like we're good. Just to make sure, we're going to reboot the computer. And now we're just going to let Ubuntu load up by default, and it should by default load up on the 5.4 kernel, since that's the only kernel that currently exists on the computer. All right, let's log in again. Press Ctrl-Alt-T to open up a terminal. Finally, here's the million-dollar question. If we have our kernel still being 5.4, it is, so we are good to go. That ends this tutorial. Next, we will focus on installing all the ROS packages that you need to get working with the LoCoBot. See you next time.